It's actually really common for pastors to prepare their sermons all by themselves, alone, largely. Maybe they're in their office, maybe they're at their home, but for 20, 30 hours a week, they basically hole up and write the sermon in a vacuum and then come out to preach it on Sunday. Maybe this is the model you use. I used this for a long time. There's not necessarily anything immoral or wrong about it, but I think there's a better way to do it, and we're going to talk about that today in this video. My name is Lane Sebring. I'm the founder of PreachingDonkey.com. I've written a couple books on preaching, and I love to help preachers think through how to communicate more clearly, how to reach out and grab their listeners and pull them in to a life-changing message. And I love to help not only other preachers communicate better, but I like to sharpen my skills as well. So we do this together here at PreachingDonkey.com, and it's so great to have you a part of what we're doing. I've got a free gift for you. If you go to PreachingDonkey.com/21 days, I've got the 21-day guide to creating killer sermons. It's going to be a really helpful guide as we go through this video, and then for you to take it on your own. It's a bit of a worksheet for you to go through over the next 3 weeks to think about how you're preparing your sermons, the steps you're taking in the right order to make your sermons really come alive and do what a sermon is supposed to do. That is to reach out, like I said, and grab people, pull them in metaphorically, and motivate them to action, inspire them to action. That's what we want to do with our messages. So go to PreachingDonkey.com/21 days, totally free. It's my gift to you, and I would love to put that in your hands. So we are in part 5 of a 7-part video series called How to Write a Sermon in 7 Steps. And today, with part 5, we're going to talk about collaboration or preaching teams. But before we get to that, I want to walk through the steps that we've been through so far and tell you kind of what you've missed if you're just joining us. Now, the good news is all these videos are on YouTube. They're going to be linked in the description, and there's even a playlist where you can just go to my Preaching Donkey YouTube channel, go to the playlist, go to How to Write a Sermon in 7 Steps, and you can just hit play and it'll play through all the videos. So they're all right there for you. Step 1, it was determine the topic, title, and hook. Okay, so in this video, we talked about just the kind of foundational step of determining what you're gonna talk about, what you're gonna call it, and what is the hook? How are you gonna interest people in it? Number 2, step 2 was digging into scripture. And we actually talked in this video about how often the way pastors will approach Bible study is they make a pretty fundamental mistake that's very common, but it's a mistake in that it really cheapens the process for you as you study the Bible. And if you want to know what that is, you got to go check out that video. It's called How to Study the Bible for a Sermon, and it's linked in the description. Number 3, how to build an outline for your sermon. That was step 3, where we talked about taking people on a journey through your sermon, creating interest and building tension, and then resolving that tension with the text, and then inspiring people to action. So that's all there in the How to Build an Outline for Your Sermon video. And then finally, step 4, which was our last step, was building sticky points. Okay, so because now that we had an outline, we needed to make points that were sticky and would land and be memorable in people's lives. And we talked about the 3 things that you should do with every point that you make in your sermons. And if you want to check that out, again, link is in the description. Go look at it there. So that brings us to today, which is step 5, where we're going to talk about collaboration. We're going to talk about what would it look like for you to, once you're to the point in your sermon where you've got your outline together, you've got your points together, where do you go from here in terms of getting it ready for delivery? Now, let me just say that I am a huge proponent of having a preaching team as a part of every step of your journey. Having a preaching team as a part of the preparation process. So in another video, I'll talk extensively about my theory and the way I teach doing preaching teams, how you can get one set up, whether informally, where you just kind of do informal collaboration, or a formal team like we have at my church, where we meet on a certain day of the week with certain people, and we have an agenda that's tied back to the message content. However you do it, there's such a benefit of having a preaching team as a part of every step of the way. What I want to do for the purposes of this video, because I want to stick to the topic, which is writing your sermon. To this point, we haven't talked about preaching teams really at all. We've been talking about you taking your process through writing a sermon, from the topic, title, and hook to digging into scripture, to making the outline, to building out the points. Well, now in the process, let's say you've done all that. My suggestion would be to never just take a sermon just as is, where you're the only one who's seen it, and just go up and preach it. This is something that I feel like even veteran preachers, this is what I teach veteran preachers to do, is to have a preaching team. Trusted people that you select, that sit around the table, not to give you approval. That's not what this is about. It's not a pass-fail. It's not that's not going to be okay. It's more so that you can get a more holistic view of how people are going to receive the material, okay? So even veteran preachers need to do this, but if you're just starting out and you're trying to figure out how do I write a message, I would highly, highly, highly discourage you from just writing it and getting up and preaching it with no one else checking it out. You really should have someone else look at it, not because you don't know what you're doing, but because it's too important to risk. When you get up to preach, you want to make sure that what you're saying, how you're saying it, the points that you're making are going to land on people like they should. They're going to be biblically accurate. They're going to be relevant to your audience, and they're going to make sense, right? So there's a relatively huge mistake that a lot of pastors make on a routine basis, and I've mentioned this already. They preach their message without running the material by anyone other than themselves first. And so this is the thing that can happen. This is a huge problem because of things I've already mentioned, right? Is it relevant? Is it going to be biblically accurate? But also, if you're the only one seeing your content, you may miss something because we all have blind spots. So often, even if this isn't your first message, let's say you've preached lots of messages, you may think something is going to make total sense to you, but it doesn't to other people. You may think something makes perfect sense when it doesn't. You may think the points connect to the main idea or the bottom line when they really don't. So we talked about that when we talked about building sticky points, that all of our points need to tie back to the bottom line that we've developed. And if you, in your mind, you may think it all works together, but then when you go show it to someone, they go, this isn't making sense to me. How does this tie back to that? And then maybe you can go back and reword the point. You may be on the right track, but need a little guidance to make sure your message connects powerfully to your audience, right? Or here's another thing that might happen. You may feel not confident at all about your message, but it may be a great message. And it would really benefit you to go show it to someone and say, hey, what do you think about this? Is this going to work? And have them tell you, I think you've got something really good here. Here's a couple things you might do differently, but I think you've got a really great message. Or they might just say, man, this is incredible. You've got to preach this as soon as you can. I can't wait to be there. Whatever the case, it's just so helpful to get guidance from other people. These are the reasons why I suggest, like I said, using a preaching team. So really quick, what is a preaching team? It's a group of people that you select, like I talked about, who help you build your message. They can help you by looking over what you've put together, as I'm suggesting here, okay? So in our step here, this is largely what you're going to do. You're going to have people look over what you've put together. The way that you're going to do this is take all the material that you've put together so far. You've got your outline. It has the points in it. Maybe to this point, you've even started to kind of rehearse it out loud. We'll talk about that in a later part of this series. But you've started to kind of talk it out. What you're going to do is you're going to reach out to at least 3 people. And the people need to be at least one other pastor, okay? One other pastor that you trust, that you think that this person has been preaching long enough to know what's going to work and what isn't. You're going to reach out maybe to a friend that doesn't go to your church, okay? Somebody who isn't in your context but is a believer, somebody that you trust and who would give you good advice, and then someone in your church, at least those 3 people. And you're going to say, hey, is there any way I could spend 10, 15 minutes running something by you? I'm going to email you the document, and then I just want to call you and go over it. Or if you can meet in person, even better. And so you email them the document or put it in their hand, and you meet or get on the phone call, and you say, all right, I want to kind of walk you through what I'm doing, and you talk through the message. You don't preach the whole thing to them unless they have the time for you to do that. But you just say, I'm going to start with introducing this idea, and here's how I think I'm going to kind of say it. And then I'm going to move to my bottom line, and this is my bottom line. What do you think about that? And then I'm going to make, then I'm going to get into this scripture, and I'm going to make these points, and you kind of walk through and tell them the illustrations you're going to give, tell them the points you're going to make, tell them the things that you plan to say that you feel like are significant, and all along the way, ask for feedback. And then when it's all done, say, listen, is there anything that didn't make sense? Is there anything that was unclear? Is there anything that really stood out to you where you're just saying, man, you've got to do that. Like, that's an incredible thing. Or this really landed on me, and that's definitely going to work. You should definitely keep that in there. Or I'm not sure that this was completely accurate to the text. Or at that point really supports the bottom line, or it doesn't. Like, you have to kind of help these people help you, okay? You've got to kind of lay out for them what you expect from yourself from a message. So you need to tell them, this is my bottom line, and I want everything to tie back to it. This is my passage, and here's what it says. I mean, there's a little bit of work that goes into even preparing them for it. But where they're going to become really in handy is when you're thinking about illustrations, when you're thinking about how the message is applied. They're going to be really helpful to you when you're describing, I'm going to tell this story. They're either going to say, yeah, that's awesome. That's a really interesting story. It's funny. It's good. It's moving. It's whatever. Or they're going to say, I don't know. It's going to be a stretch to make that story work with that point, or make that story work with this idea that you're trying to get across. So that's going to be really helpful when it comes to illustrations and application and things like that. It's also going to be really helpful when you're thinking about just kind of next steps, okay? Because one of the things that a good preaching team, a good person who's evaluating with you is going to be thinking about, and again, you have to kind of help them think this way, is they have to think about, and you have to think about, where is this message going? What is the next step? And it may be that the next step is a specific challenge you're going to offer, that you're going to extend. Maybe it's something that you as a church are going to all do together. Maybe it's less of a to do and more of a to think, or more of a to pray. But whatever the next step is, it needs to be clear, and your preaching team, your partners here, can kind of help you with that. So it's a group of people, 3 or more, that you select that help you put together your message. And they could help you, like I said, by looking over what you've already prepared, which is what I'm suggesting in this step. Now, you could have a more robust preaching team that is with you in the initial stages of content development and anything in between. Like I said, we'll do a video on that in a later time. This could be as simple as showing what you've written to a trusted friend and talking them through your content, like I said, getting their thoughts on it, and putting all this together so that you have a more rich experience when you preach it. So as they're talking, you're making notes, either in your computer or you're writing it down. You're showing with your actions that you're being attentive. Now, you don't necessarily have to make every change that they suggest, okay? Because they're not all knowing, just like you're not. But what it will do is it will help you. If you talk to 3 different people and they all kind of tell you the same thing, yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, then you probably should listen to that. Okay? Even if one person tells you that something doesn't make sense, or something may not work, or it doesn't connect, it's worth it to say, okay, tell me why, or help me understand what might make more sense, or what do you think I'm trying to say when I say this? Like, all that stuff is really helpful. And here's the thing, when you do this, by the time you get up to preach, you have gone through all of these rigorous steps, okay? Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and then before you preach it, in step 5, we are going to take a break, we're going to pause, we're going to go to someone and say, here's the work that I've done. And what I love about this is the risk level is so incredibly low here. Because guess what? If you've blown it, if you're accidentally preaching heresy and you just didn't know it, or if you're going to really offend people because of how insensitive your story is, or how off-colored that joke is, well, guess what? If it's another pastor, a trusted friend, someone you love, they're going to have a lot more grace and mercy to you than a crowd of 300 people will, or 100 people, or 500 people, or however large the congregation is that you're going to preach this to. When you do it one-on-one with people, you can kind of have these mistakes and say, yeah, that's a good point. I'm going to change that before you're right in front of people in the moment. So it's way less risky. It helps to build confidence in you, and it helps, I think, to make a more robust message, because one of the things that a preaching team does is it helps to spread the perspective around, okay? If you are, as a preacher, sitting by yourself every time, alone, by yourself, writing the messages alone, by yourself, like I said, you start to draw from the same well, okay? You're drawing from the same well, and that well runs dry. You start to give the same stories, talk about the same scriptures, give the same examples, the same illustrations, make the same points, going back to the same scriptures. Why? Because you're only one person, and you only have a limited perspective, and that's okay. It's just part of being human. But when you broaden that out to a team, now you've got multiple perspectives. You got multiple opportunities for examples and stories. That person might say, hey, you know what? Here's another example that you might be able to use, or here's one way to illustrate that, or here's a story that you could tell, or here's a whatever. So now all of a sudden, it's not just you, but it's them. And so when you do this over time, what happens is you as a preacher start to become more holistic in your applications and your illustration, and how broad your points reach, and how accurate your sermons are, because you've checked them with people that you trust, not just commentaries, but other people who know the word as well, and everything in between. And so my encouragement to you is to very early on make a habit of checking in with at least somebody to say, hey, what do you think about this? Is this going to work? And does it make sense? And is it accurate? Because this will help you in your sermon preparation and delivery. So no matter what you choose, right? If you choose to go all in with a preaching team, like we'll talk about in a future video, or if you just decide, I'm just going to do a quick check-in with at least 3 people every single time, I suggest that you at least let someone check out your outline, walk them through it, and ask them questions along the way. Especially if you're new to preaching, you'll want to make sure you're not the only one seeing your content before you preach it. And if you do this, then again, part of what we've talked about in this series is that a lot of preachers, they get up and they preach a message and it looks flawless and easy. And a lot of times, the reason why it looks flawless and easy is because a lot of work went into making that happen. And so if it seems like these steps are stacking up, understand that if you want to be an excellent communicator and you want to preach a message that's relatively distraction-free, where people can focus in on your content and not be just uncomfortable with the delivery, they can focus in on what you're saying and not be kind of mad about what you shouldn't have said, or the way you're presenting it, then you've got to understand it just takes work. It's like any other art. And so this is one of the steps where it's pretty labor intensive, because you're going to have to track people down. You're going to have to incentivize them to talk to you about it. But here's the thing. What I have found is that simply asking someone, hey, I'm about to preach, what would you think of checking out my message? Most people are pretty intrigued by that. Most people are honored by the question. And most people are just kind of fascinated with the world of sermon preparation and what all goes into it. And so they'll help you with that. And if it's another pastor, typically, especially veteran preachers, a lot of times they love to help new preachers do better. They love to help new preachers get started. They want to see the next generation come up. Whether you're new to preaching because you're young, or you're new to preaching because you just started but you're not necessarily young, doesn't matter. Most preachers, most pastors love to help aspiring preachers, because we want to see the next generation carry the torch. And so it's just something that we love to do. And so don't hesitate to ask, because a lot of times you're going to find these people are going to want to do it. But simply a cup of coffee, at a Starbucks and looking over your message is enough to do it for most people, to say, yeah, I'll be there. Let's go do it. Let's go check out your message. And so that will lead us to step 6, which is coming up in the next video, where we're going to talk about rehearsing your sermon. I'm going to give you a very robust system for rehearsing your sermon, and why it's something that so many preachers don't do, just like this, but it is the thing that I think just can set your delivery over the top. It's going to be incredible. That's going to come out next week. Don't miss it. But for now, step 5, go take some time to share your message with someone else. Be sure to go to preachingdonkey.com/21days to get your free 21-day guide to creating killer sermons. And drop a note in the comments. What do you think about this? What is your experience with preaching teams? And if you haven't yet subscribed and you've watched all the way to the end, hit subscribe on YouTube. That would mean so much to me. It's just a little red button says subscribe. That would do me just such an honor for you to do that, because it helps the channel grow. And when the channel's bigger, YouTube shows this to more people and more pastors can get this content, and I can serve more preachers with helpful content, what I think is helpful and valuable content that will help their ministry and further the gospel. So hit the subscribe button, leave a comment, and I will see you in the next video.